All right. So 5.3, which is about nationalism, revolution, and reform, basically starts with the story of the Enlightenment, which you see as number one, going to the effects upon revolutions, which is more the point of number three, against imperial powers, and then followed by that actually sparks nationalism, point number two, and inspires social changes, point number three. So that's what we'll talk through briefly now. It's going to be an overview. If we start with the Enlightenment, which starts in the 1700s, really the 1600s, you start to see certain waves of it, but the main time period is the 1700s. So since AP period 5 begins in 1750, that's definitely the time of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment happens in the salons. The salons are not places where you get your hair done. It's certainly they're the coffee shops. They're the discussion areas of Paris. So while in the period of the Enlightenment, there is a very strong government in France, such as absolutism, there is a place to talk amongst yourselves if you are part of the intelligentsia, which is away from the king. And that's basically what the salon provides. Now, the Enlightenment draws upon a thinker from the 1600s, actually two thinkers in the 1600s. The first is Thomas Hobbes, and he publishes the book, The Leviathan. This is very different than most Enlightenment thinkers. He doesn't really argue for the power of the people. He just says the people choose a king. The king provides then protection for those people. You see here, the king, he is made up of the people, kind of scales around his body, and yet with a strong sword and a strong scepter protects the people. But what Thomas Hobbes introduces is the idea of social contract. This carries into the four major Enlightenment thinkers that AP identifies. You've got John Locke, also in the late 1600s, during a time of change in England, and he supports the idea of social contract, as does Rousseau and Montesquieu. And he argues for natural rights, but he believes that people have natural rights that they keep for themselves in terms of private rights and give up their civic rights in order to have their private rights protected. He's basically Hobbes in terms of people needing protection, but a little more nicely put. So he says people are a blank slate, tabula rasa, and that they need government to protect their rights. That's Locke. Rousseau follows, he's a Frenchman, and he follows in the 1700s with a much more radical view of society being corrupt and the idea that society needs to keep their rights. And society, people actually keep their rights in order to protect them from society and government. The idea is of the noble savage that if we were left alone without society, we would be perfect. And if we can get government to that point, government would be perfect as well. Montesquieu has a slightly more skeptical view of human nature. He says power corrupts, and so you need to split up that power. It's from Montesquieu that we get the idea of the three branches and the separation of power. Voltaire, the father of the Enlightenment, during this time period is less concerned about government than the effect that religion and governments intertwining in religion has upon wars and freedom of speech. He believes in tolerance, full tolerance, and free speech, and starts using this language, which is going to become so commonplace in the 21st century. It's really the first time. This is where you start to see the birth of these Enlightenment principles. Altogether, though, what's really different about this time period, even though they disagree about what the government should look like, they all agree that the way to solve society's problems is by using observation and science. What can we observe in nature? They're drawing upon science rather than authority to solve their problems, observation rather than obedience. And so this is a shift. It's a major shift intellectually during this time of the Enlightenment. While some of these men will be supportive of religion, others will be more critical, it is still a shift overall against this idea of religious authority and following them as the answer for social problems. These things that come into the Enlightenment result in revolutions. So you've got revolutions in America and France, you have revolutions in South America, and then you also have social revolutions, which we'll get to in a moment. Of course, the American Revolution we know quite a bit about. You've learned in other classes. You've got the figures of George Washington versus George III and the conflict and the development of this national identity, which is really important. A national identity that is not based on ethnicity. It's based on these Enlightenment ideals. And really, it is based on the Enlightenment philosophers. You've got people like John Adams. They're pictured in the top, and he follows more of John Locke's ideas, a more concern for protection. Whereas Thomas Jefferson, more interested in Rousseau. And the fact that they work together on the Declaration means you're going to have pieces of people needing protection from government and people needing full rights actually in these formative documents. The Declaration of Rights actually has some of those some of those ideals. And then you've got Benjamin Franklin, who really is the figurehead in many ways, lives in France for a while, is living and breathing many of these Enlightenment ideals, embodying the scientific mind of the century. The American Revolution then inspires the French Revolution. French is much more based upon Rousseau, where the American Revolution focuses on reestablishing order. The French Revolution is going to continue to revolt over and over again as people retain their rights in government. We see this starting in 1789 with the Tennis Court Oath, which eventually turns violent on July 14th, Bastille Day, and then follows kind of a four-part trajectory. You've got a more constitutional period. This is when the Declaration of the Rights of Man is written. It is also the time when Olympia Georges, this woman here, writes the Declaration of the Rights of Women. So you've got a women's response to this document. Both of these again, actually embody both Lockean ideas of needing a government established and yet more Rousseauian ideas on the whole, as they focus on the question of people making the laws and everyone has a voice in every law that should be made. The moderate constitutional period keeps the king. They're trying to work alongside the king. But by the time you get to the 1780s, the mid-1790s, the reign of terror is in full swing. The king has run away. That's made the revolutionaries doubtful that the constitutional monarchy will ever work. So they behead the king and they start again. This is a time of radical republicanism. You got this guy right here, Robespierre, who believes that a reign of terror is the necessary way to make a republic of virtue. And he's talking about civic virtue. He's talking about strong principles. Again, rational Enlightenment ideals implemented here in the Reign of Terror. The Reign of Terror burns itself out pretty quickly. In 1794, they behead Robespierre, and then you have a more moderate reaction, but it's in disarray, and this opens the door for Napoleon. So basically what starts as an absolute monarchy ends as a military dictatorship, and the First French Revolution is over. Napoleon crowns himself in 1804. In order to do that and his following sprees, he had to actually deal with some revolution happening in his colonies. The Haitian Revolution breaks out at the same time as the French Revolution. Haiti is a French colony, so they're watching what France is doing, and they follow suit. And so the Haitian Revolution is the one successful slave revolution in the Americas. It is also an interesting principle in which a colony of an enlightened government actually gains the Enlightenment principles. It's the first anti-imperial kind of pushback that is of a different ethnicity than the home country. So you have the slaves revolting there in Haiti. Ultimately, disease kills off Napoleon's army, and Napoleon needs to turn his efforts inward to Europe itself anyway. The revolutions in Haiti start two other reactions. You see the abolition movement gaining force. Here, Haiti, which was a slave colony, gains revolutionary rights. They gain their own government. And you have a whole colony that is now an ex-slave colony. This inspires other slaves to revolt. None of them are successful, but it still carries on that legacy. So you see that in Nat Turner, for example, in America, others in Brazil, other parts of South America. But you also see the fact that this is the start of South American independence. And while most South American independence, which you can learn about in other videos in another place, but most South American revolutions focus on the Creole elite just trying to gain rights. So it is more of an American ideal where colonists, second generation, from the mother country are seeking the rights that they had, but it's still inspired by the Haitian Revolution. One of the major leaders in that is Simon Bolivar, and in his Jamaican letter, you see a lot of the revolutionary ideals. All of this, so all of these things are going against old imperialism, and you see the collapse of some of these old imperial age of exploration empires, such as the British Empire when the Americans revolt, such as the Haitian Empire when the French Empire when the Haitians revolt, and then even here in China, you see revolts against the gunpowder empires, the Taiping Rebellion against the Qing, the Marathas against the Mughals. All of these empires are kind of collapsing. That's going to open the door for new imperialism.